Judges, would you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Marcia Holland. I'll be the chief judge for today's hearing. I'm an attorney in Missoula, Montana. Most of my legal career was spent as a career public defender in Alaska, but now having moved back to Montana, I teach at the law school here. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, my name is Becca Steinhoff. I am joining today from Casper, Wyoming. I am the executive director of the John P. L. Bogan Foundation, which is a private family foundation that includes an emphasis on civics education and initiatives like this one. I too am delighted to be with you and hear from you today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Barnhart. I'm currently in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm an attorney as well, and I work at the Indiana Attorney General's office as the Chief Counsel and Director of the Consumer Protection Division. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
And if you can introduce yourselves and any teachers, mentors, or coaches that might be with you today virtually.
Hello, judges. We're all seniors. My name is Dylan Sanchez.
My name is Helen Perez.
And my name is Kaylin Rodriguez, and we are very happy to be here today, and thank you for your time.
Thanks. As you know, it's Unit 6, Question 2. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." Do you agree or disagree, and why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? And you may begin.
When talking about military-industrial complex, it is almost impossible to not mention former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. In Eisenhower's 1961 farewell address, he stated that the influence of this complex would be disastrous if its powers were to be misplaced. Historians indicate that he was pointing towards the doctrine of the Iron Triangle between congressional committees, the bureaucracy, and these interest groups. In this specific case, the alliance between our nation's military, the defense industry, and the addition of our Congress.
This essentially creates an infinite cycle of influence in our electoral process. And once this iron triangle is cemented, it gets in the way of what our founding fathers intended in the preamble's mission to ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. Raytheon Technologies is a perfect example of this, possibly becoming an iron triangle issue if Congress were to respond to this lobbying by following through, even though it may not be supported by most voters. This is a direct threat to the authenticity of our democracy and could be what Eisenhower really meant in his farewell address. On the opposition, we see that the growing influence of the United States' military power is supporting America's geopolitical interests and economy. The argument that Congress holding the power over the military leads to corruption by an iron triangle is outweighed by the economic benefits that these relationships provide. This power leads to an increase of military spending in states that can provide upwards of 1 million jobs to unemployed Americans. Additionally, the geopolitical interest that comes from this military power may promote order. Deployed troops may not be consistently fighting, but having them there keeps us and our allies safe. Removing our troops now would incentivize attacks elsewhere. Although deploying troops creates instability to begin with, the effects of removing them now could be even more catastrophic.
Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it compromises and develops the germ of every other. James Madison. Our founders knew the dangers of having a standing army after experiencing the tyranny imposed on them by the British, which is why when deliberating the Bill of Rights, the Anti-Federalists fought to ensure that we would be protected from these abuses. Specifically, our founders included the Third and Second Amendment to guarantee that we are protected from soldiers quartering themselves in our homes and that we hold the right to keep and bear arms during a well-regulated militia, and that none of these rights shall be infringed on, as well as our nation's preamble stating that we shall provide for our common defense. Although they may have been against the ideology of standing armies, they still knew the importance of having an armed force. The founders feared that by having such a large and active military, the abuses during colonial times might repeat themselves. These concerns towards a standing army would most definitely still be present today. With the amount the US spends on our defense, and the founders would also be startled not only with the large number of active members, but the strong role the US has had in involving itself in international affairs.
America is a nation born out of the womb of an international military conflict between Britain and the colonists. Yet throughout the country's history, it continues to be heavily involved in the international military arena. Military presence internationally is sometimes a necessary evil due to the reasons our troops are needed. American troops help defend allied nations, establish US presence abroad, and also provide the US with intelligence. However, sometimes it feels as if our presence is not needed, and the reasoning for our troops being there is unjust. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives our representative Congress powers regarding the military and war. With $100 million being spent on defense lobbying in 2020 and upwards of $700 billion being spent on military budget, it raises some questions and could be the answer as to why the US has such a heavy presence in the international arena. Having our soldiers stationed internationally has some benefits, but it requires balance. And we, the people, must ensure our representatives have our nation's best interest. The military don't start wars. Politicians start wars. General William Westmoreland.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did a great job of talking about why the framers wanted to ensure civilian control of the military. Do you think that civilian control still exists today?
Of course I do. As we the people, we vote representatives into our Congress that definitely, as we know, Congress does hold the power to declare war, and they do regulate our military. They decide what budget goes to certain parts of the military in different branches. So by voting in representatives that represent our views, we are in a way controlling what we want our nation to do in regards to the military.
On the other hand, we can see that sometimes civilian control is not very present in the military, considering the Iron Triangle issues that we are having with these aerospace and defense companies funding politicians and lobbying for laws that will benefit said company.
Further echoing of what my colleague was talking about, in regards to a civilian controlled military, I mean, at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives basically our Congress the power to declare war, and Congress also has the power to appropriate funds. So when these lobbyists come in and these big military, these big companies that like these companies that come in, they affect our Congress by having lobbying and by putting a lot of money in there as well.
Thank you.
If we defund the military and contract either physically or financially, what impact would that have on the rest of the world, specifically China or other superpowers?
Well, there will definitely be there would be incentivized attacks everywhere. These countries will definitely feel the need to radicalize America and our allies as well, because although we have a certain amount of instability with our troops stationed in these foreign entities, removing them would provide even more instability, because having them there keeps us and our allies safe. As I stated in my statement, it keeps a sense of order, because it's like a tension that is created within the US base that is there and the foreign entity itself.
Yeah, again, further echoing, it's all about balance. You know, we can't totally defund our military because then we will create these power vacuums in areas where sometimes our allies really need us. However, we must ensure that we have to protect the general welfare of America, as well as ensure through our Constitution that we're protecting the general defense as well, and holding up that social contract with Americans and the government.
So I'd like to talk. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Further adding on to what my colleague was saying, it will also have an economic effect on the US and other countries, especially because these defense companies are directly funding not only our politicians, but have economic interests in other foreign entities as well, such as Lockheed Martin Corps.
And just a question related to that. The last administration wanted to withdraw troops from Germany. The current administration wants to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. And yet your answer to the last question suggested that you would maybe disagree with those two administrations' decisions. Could you clarify whether or not we should continue to have troops in places where there is still some instability?
Overall, regarding that question, I believe both administrations have been trying to withdraw troops as much as possible. And if there's no problems related in these areas that we are at, we must ensure the general welfare of the nation first and foremost. So if there's no reason for our troops being needed there, and there's no reason for all that money and even American lives being cost overseas, I believe that it is in the nation's best interest to withdraw them if that's what's best for the general welfare of the people.
Thank you.
Adding on to what my colleague was saying in relation to the troops being taken out of the Middle East, I do believe that their presence there is necessary, since we saw in December that there was an airstrike by Iranian military defense in one of our bases in Iraq, which is why our military presence there is so necessary, because of the stability we put there by having our troops there, which is why it's necessary to always maintain this balance, like my colleague was saying.
Thanks.
And further echoing both of my colleagues, information travels very fast within these foreign entities, and removing our troops is going to further radicalize this. And it is easier for them to establish plans to attack our homeland rather than it would be if we left them alone.
Thank you.
You've talked about the need to maintain the numbers in our military. So what are the advantages or disadvantages of a draft?
So as of right now, the military, we have high numbers in reserve as well as in standing army. And one of the biggest fears of the founding was what could be the consequences of a standing army and how much people we have in our army currently. I believe the consequence of a draft that it could, some people may argue that it goes against your civil liberties if they do not have certain rights that believe that in war and such like that. I believe due to the numbers that we have in our military currently, and I don't think that standing a draft would be necessary. But that is what I believe through the Constitution.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear your thoughts about what impact technology will have in the context of warfare moving forward. And do you see that being more important to address than physical war that we've seen in the past?
Well, there is definitely a presence of digital attacks, especially recently, such as computer viruses and hacking that can be used from one country to another to disrupt their computer systems with the attempt of creating damage or division in said country and essentially destruction. And in Senate Report 11620, we can see the effects of this as well.
Adding on to what my colleague was saying, the use of technology and the evolution that technology now plays when it comes to war is definitely seen, as she mentioned in Senate Report 11620, since we were able to see here in our homeland how Russia's interference in our country just further created the division and created a division by spreading either propaganda or things that generally just divide our country more instead of uniting us in order to fight against these international evils.
And technology can also have
Go ahead.
Technology can also have a big role, as we see now, most more prevalent in the military in Middle East is drone strikes. You know, we could have less casualties of American lives when using these drone strikes. However, it gives the government more power in asserting themselves in different forces on these areas and in these parts of the Middle East, which can cause more more casualties. So it's about determining the risk and how much gain America gets from it.
And I'll ask a question. I'm sure we'll run out of time. But what are your suggestions for limiting the power or the sphere of influence that lobbyists have on Congress, especially? Okay.
Sorry.
By the time. Good job. Well, take a deep breath. Good job. And just a couple of comments. I really liked how you began your prepared remarks by focusing. I mean, it's really interesting that it's a military general who was a leader in an international war who's quoted as saying, you know, military industrial complex is bad. And so I really appreciate that you understood that connection to using a, you know, because it was a quote from President Eisenhower. So I thought you started really strong and then it was very fluid and connected after that. And you even pointed out that, the anti-federalists disagreed with the Federalists, and, just historical content was really good. So you answered all parts of the question. And I think this question in particular for Unit 6, it's hard to get a handle on, and yet you managed to do so really well. So thank you for that. And I really liked your thought. I did want to hear that last answer, because you did emphasize lobbying is an undue influence on decision-making in Congress. So I wish we had a little bit more time, but thank you for the answers to your questions. They were very thoughtful.
Thank you.
I would echo a lot of what Marcia said. I too really appreciated how you started your prepared remarks and referencing the iron triangle and offering some description. And then, I think you considered the dynamic lenses that affect this issue in terms of the geopolitical interest, the economic interest. And so you had a thorough approach to talking us through your argument and providing some insight and perspectives. I think you did a really nice job of laying out why the founders felt the way they did, and how the Constitution is written, and what the implication of that is. So I think you shared with us so much information that just had a really nice flow to it, that again answered all those questions in a way that we were just able to clearly understand where and how they were answered. And then you carried a lot of that same information and added some depth to it in the questions. We always like to see that sense of coherence from your prepared remarks into the questions. So you've clearly prepared and done your research, and that came through in both sections of the hearing today. So thank you very much for your preparation, and well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I agree with all of that. I think you all worked together really well as a team. You had good balance. I really like the theme of the iron triangle. It was helpful for me as a judge to wrap my head around that and figure out where you were going. I would suggest, in terms of to think about, war is changing with technology, right? It's easier to hide. It's easier to kind of do different things, and it doesn't look like what wars looked like in the past. That's kind of always been the case. But in terms of for you all, is a cyber attack attacking a U.S. company and a declaration of war? Perhaps, right? And certainly it could look that way. But with technology, you don't necessarily need the physicality of people, but you also need a defense on that front as well. So you touched on all those themes, and I very much appreciate the discussion, and I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
you.